Hi everyone, and welcome back to yet another Lanterna IB economics video. Today we're going to be continuing on the theme of elasticities. Now remember, in the IB economics syllabus we have four types of elasticities. We have price elasticity of demand. We have price elasticity of supply. Now both these two have already been covered in videos, so feel free to go back to our YouTube channel and check out these videos so you have a solid understanding of the other elasticities before this video. Okay? In this video, we're going to go through the last two elasticities, which you can see on the screen now, YED and XED. Okay? Now these are a tiny bit different to price elasticity of supply or price elasticity of demand. As you can hear, the one thing that those two elasticities had in common was this price, that it's talking about the price of the good. These two elasticities, these last two elasticities that we're talking about today, have something different that we're changing. We're not changing the price of the good. Instead, we're looking at two other variables. Okay, let's break them down one by one, and we'll start with YED. Okay, I'm going to bring up the definition for YED here, and you'll see exactly what it is. Okay, income elasticity of demand. Remember, in economics, Y always signifies income. Don't ask me why, but it means income. Okay, so income elasticity of demand is the first one that we're talking about. Now, if you've been a diligent watcher of the last two videos, you're probably already having an idea of what the definition for income elasticity of demand is going to be. Because remember, elasticity always talks about the responsiveness of one variable to changes in another variable. So how much does this variable change by when we change some other variable? Okay, now in this case, because we're talking about income, because we're talking about demand, well, we're going to see that YED, the income elasticity of demand, measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded, how much does quantity demanded change by, to changes in income. Essentially, what we're looking at is when a person becomes richer or poorer, when a person gets higher income or lower income, how much does their quantity demanded of a good change? Now, this is quite an interesting concept, and we'll dive into a couple of examples because it might be a bit more complicated than you might initially believe. Okay, we've got this little equation as well. YED is the percentage change of quantity demanded over the percentage change of income. Okay, I'm not going to go through this mathematical calculation in depth because if you go back to the second video of the PED series, we go through exactly how to calculate these percentage changes, how to do calculations with any elasticity. Okay, so go back to that if you're an HL student struggling with the maths part of it. If you're an SL student, you don't need to worry about knowing these calculations. All you need to make sure that you know is what the formula actually is and what the definition of YED actually is. Okay, so let's go back to just thinking about what YED really is. Okay, we say it's essentially measuring how much does our quantity demanded of a good change as a result of changes in our income. So suppose one day I get a raise. I get £50,000 extra in my pocket. Okay. What I'm wondering is what types of goods will I start demanding more of, and what types of goods will I start demanding less of? Okay, this is the real question that we've got at hand. Which goods are we going to demand more? Which goods are we going to demand less? Okay, let's have a look at those two types of goods that we're talking about there. We're talking about normal versus inferior goods. Now, what do you think would be the definition of a normal good based on what we were just talking about? Well, a normal good would be a good for which, when our income increases, we also buy more of them. Okay? Makes sense, right? So if you think, suppose I get a raise, suppose I get a higher income, well, what types of goods will I buy more of? Well, I'm probably going to buy more TVs, I'll buy more computers, I'll buy more tech gadgets and so on. Maybe I'll buy more cars. You can think of really any example. Most goods that you think of will probably be normal goods. Okay, these essentially mean that when your income increases, so does your quantity demanded. Now, I'm interested a tiny bit about the maths of normal goods, right? Remember that our equation for YED is percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in income, okay? So for normal goods, what happens? Well, for normal goods, let's suppose that we've got, let me make sure that I can write on this. For normal goods, for example, we said that suppose I became richer, or our percentage change in quantity demanded went up. It was positive, okay? We had a positive change in our income. Well, what happens to normal goods in terms of their quantity demanded? Well, we said for normal goods, like cars, TVs, and so on, I'm also going to buy more of these. The percentage change will also be positive. The quantity demanded will also go up, okay? In this case, you can see that both the percentage change in income and the percentage change in demanded are positive. They're both going up, okay? What is that going to imply? Well, it implies that our YED will also be positive. So essentially what we're saying is normal goods will have a positive YED, okay? So remember that whenever we have our income going up for goods that are normal goods, our quantity demand will also go up, leading to a positive YED. Okay. On the other hand, when we're looking at inferior goods, let's make this in red so we can see the opposite. When we're looking at inferior goods, we're talking about goods when my income increases, I buy less of them. Okay, can you think of any examples like that? Which goods would I buy less of when I get a higher income? Well, suppose I get a raise, £50,000 a year, or whatever I said, okay? What do you think I'm going to buy less of? Well, I'll probably buy fewer bus tickets, because maybe I'll have a private chauffeur. Or I'll probably buy less fast food, because I can, eat at some fine dining place instead. Okay, so there are particular types of goods that as you become richer, you'll actually buy less of. Okay, bus tickets being a great example, fast food, or any other kind of cheap items like that. Okay, so what essentially is happening there, where we're saying that as our, let's see if we can make this work. As our income increases, as our income goes up, our quantity demanded of those goods actually decreases, leading to a negative YED. Okay, so for inferior goods, we have a negative YED. Okay, because the income is going one way, the quantity demanded is going another. One is positive, one is negative. This is going to lead to a negative YED for these inferior goods. Okay, so a good thing to note there, mainly for the HL students, being able to understand what will the value of YED be. For SL students, just make sure that you understand the concept of a normal good being one where as your income increases, you're going to buy more of them. And an inferior good is the opposite. As your income increases, you'll buy less of them. Okay, and know a couple of examples. I cited for inferior goods, bus tickets and fast food, for example. You'll see we've also got necessity and luxury goods up on there, okay? Necessity and luxury goods is something, once again, we talked about with regards to PED. Talked about something being necessity versus luxury. A necessity is something that you need for your survival, right? So suppose you're a diabetic, you'll need insulin. No matter what the price is, you're going to buy that insulin, okay? Versus a luxury good is something that you can do without. Maybe a car, maybe a TV. You don't need it for your survival, but you like having it. Let's think about the concept of necessity and luxury as it relates to your income. Do you think, with insulin, for example, as our example, do you think that if you became richer, suddenly you'll just buy tons of insulin? Probably not. Essentially, we're probably going to keep our quantity demanded quite similar. We're not going to decrease our quantity demanded, but I can't see a world in which we're going to shoot up our quantity demanded massively just because we became richer. We're not going to stock up on insulin just because we got richer. Okay, so what you can see here is in the case of necessity goods, even if our income shoots up massively, maybe our quantity demanded will only increase by a tiny bit. Okay, so I'm going to clear this for a second and we can see what is actually going to happen. Essentially, we're saying that our income is shooting up by absolute tons, but our quantity demanded only increases by a tiny bit. What this means is we've got a big number in the denominator and a small number in the numerator. Okay, a small number in the numerator, big number in the denominator is going to lead to some kind of fraction. Okay, this number is going to be less than 1. So we say that for necessity goods, we end up with a YED that is less than 1. Okay, because as our income increases, our quantity demanded of that good doesn't increase by that much. If we think about luxury goods, on the other hand, luxury goods are ones when your income increases, you're going to buy tons of them. Okay, diamond chains or cars or whatever. You're going to proportionally increase your quantity demanded of these by even more. Okay, so essentially what we're saying is that when your income increases by some amount, your quantity demanded of these will increase by even more. Okay, you're going to absolutely shoot up your quantity demanded of these. What does this lead to? Big number in the numerator, small number in the denominator. This leads to a YED that is greater than 1. Okay, YED being greater than 1. Okay, so there we've got our different types of YEDs, of elasticities when it relates to the income. Okay, so we can see normal goods where as your income increases, you buy more of them. You've got inferior goods, as you buy more, as your income increases, you buy less of them. You've got necessity goods like insulin. As you become richer, your quantity demand might increase by a tiny bit, but not by that much. And then we've got luxury goods. As your income increases, you buy way more of them. Okay, and you can see the YED related to each one. Remember, SL students mainly need to understand these different concepts and have examples for each. HL students should be aware of how can you actually memorize these numbers as well. YED being less than 1, YED being greater than 1, and so on for these different numbers. Okay, let's transition into talking about XED. Okay, XED is the last elasticity that we had to talk about in the IB syllabus. Okay, so let's see if we can define it first. Okay, this is a slightly different one. Cross elasticity of demand, or XED, looks at two different types of goods and compares them. All the other elasticities that we've looked at up until this point have all been talking about changing something about one good. Maybe changing the price of one good, or changing the income and looking at the quantity demanded of one good. With cross elasticity of demand, we're looking at how does the change in price of one good, so for example, one good becomes cheaper or becomes more expensive, how will that change the quantity demanded of a second good? So, for example, if Pepsi became way cheaper, what will happen to the quantity demanded of Coca-Cola? Okay, and that's a question to think about. Or if, let's say, printer ink became more expensive, what will happen to the quantity demanded of printers? Okay, another interesting one to think about. We'll kind of bring back these examples. These are two famous examples. We'll say exactly how we use them. But let's define cross-elasticity of demand quickly. Okay, we say cross-elasticity of demand, or XED, measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded of one good, so for example, the quantity demanded of Coca-Cola, to changes in the price of another good. So for example, measuring the quantity demanded of Coca-Cola when Pepsi, this other good, changes its price. Okay? So exactly as we kind of talk about it. And you can see there's a formula related to that as well. This formula looks like any other of the elasticity formulas. XED is the percentage change in quantity demanded of good A. So in our example, that would be the percentage change in quantity demanded of Coca-Cola divided by the percentage change in price of good B, which would be Pepsi. Okay, remember, in order to do these calculations, you need to use this formula that we talked about in the second video of our PED little series. Okay, so you can have a look at how to calculate those if you're an HL student. But this is the general formula, right? Let's think back about those examples, because I gave two examples, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And then I talked about printers and printer ink. Okay, what I gave there are examples of substitutes versus complementary goods. Okay, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are known as substitutes. Why? Because they don't work in conjunction. They're essentially rivals. You buy one or the other. You drink Pepsi or you drink Coca-Cola. You don't drink them together necessarily, right? Now, substitutes have a very particular XED. Let's take that example that we talked about, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. When the price of Pepsi decreases, what will happen to the quantity demanded of Coca-Cola? Well, if the price of Pepsi decreases, everyone's going to start buying Pepsi. So people will buy less Coca-Cola. Essentially what we're saying is with substitutes, like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, like Twix and Mars, we say that wherever the price of one good goes, the quantity demanded of the other good will follow. So if Pepsi became more expensive, well, no one's going to buy Pepsi, so the quantity demanded of Coca-Cola also increases. Okay, you can see these guys go together wherever they are. Okay, if one is positive, so is the other. If one is negative, so is the other. Okay, if we're looking at that in terms of our equation, our percentage change in quantity demanded of good A and our percentage change in price of good B. Essentially, this means that if this guy is positive, so is this guy. And if this one were to be negative, so would this guy, okay? Now, for anyone kind of who has some mathematical proficiency, you'll understand quite quickly then that no matter what, the XED will always be positive then, okay? So for substitute goods, we'll always have a positive XED, okay? Now, I have a little device for you to memorize this that I was taught when I was in high school as well, is that we say that Twix and Mars being examples of substitutes, Twix and Mars are a positive experience. A positive meaning, hey, it has a positive value, and experience meaning it has a positive XED. So if you remember that little device, Twix and Mars are a positive experience, and you're never going to get this wrong. You don't even have to think through the entire maths of it. Twix and Mars, positive experience, remembering that Twix and Mars are examples of substitutes, right? So that would be an example of a substitute. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Twix and Mars, they're always going to end up with a positive XED, okay? Whereas when we look at complementary goods, that's where I gave the examples of printers and printer ink. Remember, you can't use a printer without ink to accompany it, okay? One without the other is completely pointless. So let's say, once again, for the sake of examples, we've got the price of printer ink shoots up. Suddenly printer ink is super expensive. What do you think is going to happen to the quantity demanded of printers? Suppose ink is extremely expensive. You can't find it anywhere for cheap. Well, no one's going to want to print stuff, right? So the quantity demanded of printers is going to fall because you need these to work together, right? So if the price of ink goes up, the quantity demanded of printers goes down. Okay? Or if you think about the opposite case, if the price of printer ink went down, printer ink is now super expensive, what's going to happen to the quantity demanded of printers? Well, suddenly it's super cheap to print because the ink is cheap, so the quantity demanded of printers will go up. Essentially what you can see is the opposite phenomenon, right? If the price of good B goes up, so printer ink becomes more expensive, the quantity demanded of good A will go down. The quantity demanded of printers will go down. Whereas if the price of printer ink went down, the quantity demanded of printers would go up. Okay? As you can see from the maths here, no matter what situation we're in, we're going to end up with a negative XED, right? So complementary goods will always have a negative XED, an XED value that's less than 0. Okay? Remembering that substitutes always have an XED that's greater than 0. Okay? So what do you need to really know about this? Well, as an SL student, if you can memorize the definition, if you can memorize the formula, understand the difference between substitute and complementary goods, and have some examples in your back pocket for each one, you're pretty set. Okay? If you're an HL student, you'll also need to know how to do these calculations with XED, remembering you can go back to our PE video to check that out, and also making sure that you understand that substitutes have this positive XED value, complementary goods have a negative XED value, and explaining how that can be shown from a mathematical standpoint, like we just did. Okay, once you've got this down with YED and XED, you've got the bulk of elasticities down. Okay, so we've covered PED, we've covered PES, covered YED and XED. These are your four main elasticities, and now you've got a good core understanding of how each of these elasticities work. Tune in to the next video to check out how governments imposed taxes on different goods and what effect that has on a market equilibrium. Okay, tune in for that. I'll see you soon.